Hello, welcome to Exotic Gardening UK. In this episode I'm going to show you 4 ways to overwinter cannas. Now it's getting to, we're into December now, and we've had a good frost which has blackened all the foliage of the cannas, so it's time to deal with them for winter. And behind me, this is one of the biggest cannas. This is Canna musifolia, and it's done okay this year. It got up to about just over 2 meters, but this can get much taller than that. One of the reasons it didn't get to its full potential is because it was left in the ground all last winter with a mulch, and that is the first way you can overwinter cannas. If you live in an area where the ground isn't waterlogged in winter and it's not terribly cold winters, so this has seen, I think it was about -4, -5 last winter on the coldest nights. So obviously it's protected underground, that's where all the rhizomes are. So you just cut this down to the ground, put some straw or some old compost or any sort of bark or anything over the ground just to insulate it, a bit like a blanket, stop the cold penetrating through and down into the rhizomes, and that will protect it over winter. The disadvantage of doing that is next spring it just takes a bit of time just to, for the ground to warm up and for the cannas to show their faces above ground, and they're a bit slower to get going, but once they get going they grow really well. But as you can see behind me, this hasn't grown to absolute maximum height. It could do with another sort of 50 centimeters, maybe up to 1 meter, because this is a very large canna. So another way of dealing with cannas is to actually dig them up, and that's what I'm going to do with this one this year. Not because I'm going to lose it over winter by leaving it in the ground, but I want to get that extra height and bigger established plants earlier in the season. So I'm just going to get my secateurs and cut this down to about 10-15 centimeters off the ground. So I'm just going to cut back all this foliage on this very wet, miserable day. You see loads of water comes out of the stems as well. And as well as all these big stems, even though we've had a frost, we've still got new shoots trying to grow at the base as well, but obviously they won't make it now. So we'll just continue cutting all these across. And basically I'm cutting this off just to make it easy to lift up in a minute, because there'll be less to lift and it'll be less cumbersome. And all this foliage, obviously it's been blackened mainly, and it's not going to do anything for the plant at this stage. Now with all that foliage cut away, I can see what I've got to deal with, and I've got multiple sort of plants here basically. It's bulked up over the year, and this is quite a vigorous canna, so there should be some quite big rhizomes under the ground. I'm going to try to lift this with my garden fork, and we're going to see what we end up with, but we should have lots of big rhizomes. So let's just get the garden fork and basically work his way around this. You can hear that ripping out of the ground, and sometimes when you're cutting back the foliage, you can accidentally lift a bit of the rhizome, which is fine. You can pop that up if you wish, but I'm trying to keep this really in a couple of big clumps. And that's one big clump. I'm using a fork so I don't bring up too much soil, which would happen if I had the spade. Right there, got a nice natural clump here. So that is a nice healthy clump. Some nice fleshy roots, you got loads of rhizome underneath. New shoots forming as well, you can see around the sides. And I'm going to continue using the fork to get natural divisions like this, and then we'll move to the next stage. So I've dug up the clump now, and I've got 2 different types of clumps. We've got the smaller ones here, which are small parts, just a bit of rhizome on each, not much soil on them, and they can be potted up individually into old compost just to store them over winter. And we've also got the bigger clumps like this where I've not messed about them at all, so you've got all the soil still around and they're all still in one big clump without any breaks, and they're going to be again basically lifted into one large pot and stored over winter like that. Now for these smaller ones, all we're going to do is pot them up pretty much individually. Just got some multi-purpose compost, put a bit of that in there, and we'll get one and just pot round it. And what we're going to do with these for overwinter is to keep them semi-dormant. It doesn't take much to wake up cannas in the tropical plants, unlike things like colocasias and alocasias that take a lot of heat really to get them going in spring. Cannas they wake up pretty quickly, give them a bit of light and above sort of 10-12 degrees and they sort of start waking up. So we're going to keep them in that sort of state at about 10-12 degrees, so it's semi-dormant on the edge of growing. And I'll do that with the rest of these. And then a big clump like this, which I want to keep as one big clump, I'm going to put it in a big pot. When I say a big pot, I've ran out of big pots, but I do have this trug here. So it's just going to get lifted into the trug with a bit of old compost. So just put some compost in there. Now obviously you want a pot really with drainage holes if you're going to be watering this a lot, but obviously this is for overwinter and this isn't going to get watered. So this can just be lifted in. Because it's a trug, it's bent and fitted that in quite nicely. And I'll just pot some more compost around the sides. And with cannas, unlike dahlias, they can't completely dry out. They need to have a bit of moisture. You want to keep the rhizomes nice and plump over winter. And that way they'll grow much quicker in spring and much better with more vigour. So I'll just continue doing this with the rest of them, and then these are all going to go into the greenhouse in a semi-dormant state. So far we've looked at 3 different ways of overwintering cannas. We've looked at leaving them in the ground, cutting them back and mulching them. We've looked at digging them up, dividing into small pieces and potting them up individually. And we've also looked at lifting a huge big clump and overwintering that without disturbing it. And I did say there was a 4th way. And the 4th way is pretty much foolproof, and that is collecting seed. So this canna behind me, obviously it's blackened off, but it's still standing firm. And if we look at the top, we've got some nice big fat seed pods. So I'll just pick one off now. And we'll have a look in here and we'll find that we've got some nice big black and brown seeds. And this happens, obviously you've got a species canna. It doesn't work if you've got one of the sort of the sterile hybrids. So if you've got Pretoria, Durban, something like that, it won't have viable seeds. But a lot of the species, well, all the species, if you've had flowers and you've had it to mature on the plant, you'll get nice big fat seed pods like this. And this is so easy to overwinter. You just take it in, take it out of the pods, dry them off for a little bit and keep it in your fridge or somewhere cool, and then sow them next spring. And I have done a video, I'll just do a link up there to sowing canna seeds, the really easy way with boiling water, which guarantees really high germination rates. And thank you for watching this edition of Exotic Gardening UK. You watch Kris Weekly. Join me next time, we'll be doing more in the garden.